Well, good afternoon. Hello. Happy Friday to everybody and welcome to today's lunchtime thinking, which is part of a series of wellbeing thinkings that we are doing with Deloitte. My name is Liz Moseley. I can see some friendly and familiar names popping up in the chat. If this is your first thinking, you're very welcome. It's what we call a forum for civilized disagreement. We're here to have a conversation that involves everybody. If you want to weigh in, we very much want to hear what you think, particularly today with today's topic talking about the realities of hybrid working and how it's panning out for everyone. I'd love to hear your personal experiences, reflections, stories, anecdotes, and where you think this is going to go in the world of work. You can do that by putting your little digital hand up. You can join in the chat, and I will bring everybody in so we can join together, trying to come to, if not consensus, then some sense of a point of view on an answer to our question, which is hybrid working worse for women? And maybe we'll talk a little bit about, is hybrid working a little bit worse for everybody? Who knows? Or maybe it's better. We've joined by a couple of fantastic invited experts who'll get the discussion going, but don't hold back. Do please join in. I was reflecting on the term. I mean, it's one of those words that if you've spent a bit of time in the last sort of year to year and a half in and around what we might call white collar working environments, organizations that previously were mainly based in an office, those are the sort of terms of reference for today's conversation. I know not everybody works in that way, but that's broadly what we're trying to talk about today. If you had £1 for every time somebody said the word hybrid to you, you wouldn't need to host a thinking. But I used to talk about hybrid working. I only recently remembered when I first went back to work after I had my first baby. This is back in 2010 or 2011 rather. And I went back 4 days a week, but ended up doing calls on the Friday. And I used to call the way I worked on a Friday hybrid working, because I'd be on a conference call with the American team while feeding fish fingers to a sort of 1-year-old. That's not what we mean by hybrid working, but maybe we'll start with Emma Codd, who is the Global Inclusion Leader for Deloitte. Let's just set up clearly what it is we mean when we say hybrid working before we get into the rights and wrongs of it.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much, Liz. And it was really interesting actually seeing that data at the start as well. So look, hybrid working, I mean, well, first of all, my view on it is that it is ours to mess up or ours to make a success. I mean, hybrid working, to me, effectively, we've long tried to make flexible, or what we call agile working, a success. And that's typically been people working through reduced hours, formal agreements, maybe it could be job share, all sorts of ways of doing it, but typically that's been formal ways of working where it's in your contract. And now, obviously, from a hybrid perspective, what we're saying is that this is going to be a way of working. Certainly from our perspective as an organization, we've said, you know, it's control over where, when, how you work. So what does that mean? Well, it means that effectively you can have people who are on, you know, not working reduced hours, but just working in different places. So some from work, some from home, but I think some context that's really important, if you'll allow me. My view is that we have spent years trying to make flexible or agile working work. And it took the pandemic it took a crisis to make that happen, to make us work in a different way and accept that that actually could work. But what we also know is that experience has predominantly adversely impacted many women. And the women at work data that we have from a Deloitte perspective, 5,000 women across 10 countries around the world, all had strikingly similar experiences during that time. 35% drop in mental health, mental well-being, felt overwhelmed even after asking for a reduction in hours, felt judged on hours spent online rather than output, felt unsupported. So lots of this sort of stuff where, you know, unfortunately the impact for women has been disproportionately negative. And then the backdrop against that is, you know, well, what about before that? And a study we did in the UK with TimeWise back in 2017, you know, feeling of that if I worked in a different way, fewer opportunities, missed out on chances, judged on presenteeism. So I think now today, so we know there were challenges with it pre-pandemic. We know the pandemic had challenges from the perspective of women. And let's face it, it's still sadly the majority of women that do the caring. And we're now in this mixture, this world where, you know, it could predominantly make those that choose, and for good reason, for example, for caring reasons, not to be in work, it could, you know, unlevel the playing field, a question as to whether that's level in the first place. So I think, you know, I do think it presents a great opportunity, but equally it brings a lack of predictability, the fear of missing out on opportunities and probably missing out on opportunities. And, you know, that sort of fear, and I've experienced that myself, of I'm not physically there. It feels like I'm not in the room. It feels like I don't have a voice. Is that going to impact me?
Yeah, there's a lot in there. I want to come back to this, talking about feeling like you don't have a voice, but let's sort of zoom into the moment that we're precisely in now, or that lots of organisations are precisely in now, at a point where so Plan B is sort of dissipated. The work from home order has been lifted in this country anyway. There are big companies that are sort of coming through. It feels like they're coming through. Nobody quite knows what's around the corner in next autumn and all the rest of it with the virus, but feels like we're coming to a point where we can start having a little bit more visibility of how it's going to feel as organisations working over the next, let's say, 6 months. I mean, I'm making up the timeframes for the sake of it. And the people who are designing what happens now, what happens next week and the week after and the week after that, we've had a lot of conversations, both in private and in public, with people who are trying to figure this out. Is it better to do this many days? You know, how are we going to use our offices when people do come in? How much choice is a very loaded word, perhaps we'll come back to that, should we give people? Emma, do you think, given what you've said about how women particularly were impacted during the pandemic, during the lockdown intensive phase of the pandemic, and the status of women in the workplace before the pandemic even happened, is it that there aren't enough women in the room designing the solutions that are happening now? Is that going to compound the problem?
I don't think, well, look, I can only comment from the perspective of my own organisation, and I think we've got lots of women in the room designing the solutions. But I think it's one thing to design a policy. It's another thing, lived experience and culture. And I always talk about everyday culture. So we've got, you know, flexible working policies, we've got this, we've got that. But the reality is, will I avail myself of them if I am, you know, an employee in an organisation? Well, it comes down to what my leader does. And it comes down to the everyday culture. And that to me is the critical thing. It's honestly, I think this comes down in a large part to how we as leaders, or how, you know, where we work with a leader, how they lead. And that was the same pre-pandemic. It was the same during it. And I think that's the all important thing now. Can we lead in a way that does enable everyone to be included, whether they are in, you know, present physically or not? That's the critical thing for me.
Thanks so much. I'm going to come to Rosie, and there's already some great comments in the chat, so I'll bring people in relatively soon. Hi, Rosie. Nice to see you. Rosie's a director at the Global Institute for Women's Leadership at King's. And Rosie, this was, I am conscious, as I think you and I shared a similar, and Emma shared a similar concern quite early in this process, where we were thinking, I'm not quite sure this is going to be the panacea, the sort of sunny uplands that people were presenting it to be. This idea of a more flexible, more hybrid, more welcoming to people who have caring responsibilities, different kinds of lives, those kinds of things. I'm just not sure it's going to pan out quite in that way. We've had people in the chat already mention things like proximity bias as a big thing on LinkedIn today, people getting very involved in that. But we women, we working women, have been asking for things like this for as long as I've been in the working world. It was supposed to be the solution. So what is going wrong? Is it, as Emma says, it's really all about the tone that's set from a leadership level? Is that the key?
I think that's really important. And I think I mean, I think it's a bit early to say it's definitely going wrong, but what I suspect is we're going to see a huge variation in practice across employers. We're going to have employers like Deloitte, where Emma is, who are really thinking about this and measuring the impact and are thinking about how to evaluate people's performance depending on whether they're working remotely, hybrid, in the office. And there'll be other organizations that are not investing in that thinking and that measurement, who just think, oh, this is good for everybody. And that's what I'm really concerned about, because it's a wonderful message to send. We realize people can be very productive at home, and actually we should be treating those people who work in a hybrid or a remote format equally, but that's just not going to happen on its own. Existing inequalities will come through if we don't actually think about what their sources are and how we address them. And we know that already we tend to have a two-track workforce in the kind of white-collar economy, where if you work part-time or flexibly, which tends to be women and typically women who've had children, you just don't get promoted and you don't get the pay rises, you don't get the opportunities. And that is a sort of two-tier workforce. I've been very concerned right from the beginning we might move to three-tier, where we have those who are in the office as much as possible, who gain this kind of profile effect from the face-to-face visibility. And then we have hybrid workers who have some mix between the two, and then maybe fully remote. And of course, there's been lots of talk about suburban hubs being a real opportunity for people who don't want to work in their own house, but they can work nearby. Well, that sounds great. On the other hand, who do we think is going to be in those suburban hubs, and how are they going to be connected to the kind of headquarters in the city? I'm really concerned about the potential gendering of that. And unless we think about what is it we want people to do and how are we going to measure whether they've done it, and we're going to allow these profile effects or proximity bias to kick in. And so I think it's about that evaluation and performance. I saw some comments in the chat about remote first. I have to say, I find that a really interesting and intriguing way of putting it, because I think if we wait for people to put their hands up, that's when the bias will come in. Yeah. Whereas if we say, what jobs need to be done face to face, what can we actually do better in a quiet space on our own? And we all know the research on our own experience that when you need to just get something done and get your head down, being away from colleagues is useful. When you're trying to team build, actually a bit of face-to-face can be really useful. And so I think it's actually maybe sending some people home to do some tasks and saying to others, actually, I think for this activity, it'd be really useful if you could come in. And I think there's a bit of there's a mistaken idea out there. Flexibility is good for parents. I'm not really sure that's true. I'm a parent of 2 children myself. I think predictability is essential for parents. And there are times when we've all been there, you've got to, an emergency comes up at work, you've got to ask that friend to help, you've got to see what you can do. But if life is always like that, it is unsustainable. And so you need to have some predictability in your work life. And the real danger of hybrid is it'll become the opposite. You'll never know what day you're going to be called into the office, or how many hours you're supposed to be available online, or whether you can get to that school play or that pickup. That's my big concern.
Yeah, thanks ever so much. Rosie, I'm going to bring in some of the first great comments from the chat to sort of open this up a little bit, because there's a lot of ways that we can attack this question, various different lenses. Let's go to Marie-Claire first, if we can. Marie-Claire Fenech, who's a good pal of Tortoise. Are you there, Marie-Claire?
I am.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Hello.
You were making a comment about the sort of pre-existing culture, which we've touched on a little bit, and how this phase might basically entrench existing dysfunctions.
Yeah, so I suppose looking at my own personal perspective, there was somebody in the chat who mentioned about, mostly women with children. But I don't have any kids, and I very much prefer to work outside the office. Because it is, where I particularly work, it's a very male-dominated, very jolly, but still very male-dominated environment. And I actually get a lot more work done, and I can concentrate and I can function better often when I'm outside of that space. But as a result, I'm not included. I'm not necessarily, one could blame me for that if you wish. And I think that hybrid working, I think it does have to come down to re-evaluating the culture of the organisation to start with. What are the real values of the organisation, and does everybody participate in that? Does everybody feel that those values apply to them? And when you go back to the values of a company, you can then start embracing everybody within that culture.
Thanks so much, Marie-Claire. I'm going to go back to Emma, because a phrase that Marie-Claire used, I think is really telling. Very jolly in a male-dominated environment, very jolly, but she finds that she can function better at home. And this comes back to this thing about proximity bias a little bit, which is some of the aspects that have been hailed about hybrid working is this thing about best of both, that we get to go back to the office, we get to be together, we get to build those relationships, enjoy one another's company, greater than the sum of our parts when we're really working together. The sort of, you know, the good bit about working with people and in a team and feeling together. And we also get the opportunity to sort of do other things in our lives when you know, trekking into London and out again, if that's where you live, isn't you know, necessarily productive. But that also is the problem with it, isn't it? That the jolliness, the camaraderie, the, you know, beers after work, all of that, you know, the great thing about coming back together is also the problem for those people that are left at home. Isn't that the sort of fundamental crux of the issue?
I think this, I mean, and I was just typing something in the chat actually to say I completely agree with Mary Claire about culture. I think this comes down to the everyday culture that exists within the organisation in the first place. I am a huge proponent of a respectful culture, and a respectful and inclusive culture. I've always said, you know, we talk a lot about diversity and inclusion, and my view is you don't get inclusion without respect at all times. And so to me, the culture of when you are physically there needs to be a culture where you feel like you belong, where you do feel respected all the time, where you're not subjected to banter. I mean, the Women at Work survey, and sorry to bang on about that data so much, but it was so fascinating because we asked, you know, what of the following include the uninclusive behaviours have you experienced over the last year? You know, have you experienced them? And, you know, there's really large amounts, over 50%, I'm nearing 60% of women, you know, ticked a load of the boxes in terms of the sort of behaviours, actually, whether they experienced in hybrid or away when they were working virtually or physically in the workplace. So to me, this is about, you know, it's absolutely about the organization's values, but people living those values. And again, I come back to leadership and, you know, and the people you work with. An organization can have a set of values. It can say one thing, and absolutely we can all buy into those. You invariably can't argue with those. But it's actually, does that play out on the ground? Does when you go in, do you have this jolly thing that actually is, you know, is offensive for some people, is, you know, that environment. So, you know, to me, it comes down to fixing the culture, because I still think there are many organizations where that everyday culture is still not where it needs to be.
Thanks ever so much. There's a really interesting point that has not occurred to me before, to my shame and embarrassment, that Linda House-Mannis has made in the chat about sort of more junior people who sort of are trying to get to grips with a working environment. Hi, Linda.
Hello. Sorry, it's a bit sunny here.
No, don't worry. I can see you.
In Felstead. Are you referring to my apprenticeship?
Yeah.
Comment? Yeah. I'm a great believer in apprenticeships. Develop them, deliver them, etc. And as I'm CEO of the Institute of Workplace and Facilities Management, so we're all over this whole topic. And for 2 years, we've all been working from home and working really, really well. And say it's worked for the majority of people. Some people have suffered with mental health issues because they're young people living on their own. So therefore, we've made the office available to them. So they're going to the office, but there's no other person in there. But I've got a number of my other directors, etc., saying about apprenticeships, because I believe we have a moral responsibility to help young people. So therefore, to offer apprenticeships, because I've been doing this for the last 10 years. But I keep on saying to my directors, we can only have an apprentice if we are back in the office. And I don't mean all of us 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, but there has got to be a good proportion of people in the office, so that when a young person comes in, they're not just sitting there just doing what they do, looking at a screen like we're all doing here today, but they're picking up, they're getting involved in impromptu meetings, they're getting them to do different tasks. They get to understand the workings of a business. and the wider economy, and the impact that you have as an organisation on the economy. And they can only do that by sitting there and listening to and getting engaged in lots of meetings. That was my view. So I keep on saying no to apprenticeships until we do get to a safer time, because every single time I say back to the office, another variant comes out. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop saying that. But so that, and I'm really concerned about the impact this is going to have on those younger people, where they cannot join these apprenticeship programs and not get that rich experience that they all need.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I'm going to come to Rosie, because what Linda's describing, the conversation framing today was this hybrid working worse for women, but there are other groups as well. I know you've mentioned how there is a strongly gendered aspect to this from what we know about dynamics in the labour market, but there we have a sort of set of realities that Linda's described about young people, how apprenticeships have worked in the past, the rich environment was Linda's language, and the sort of sense I get that sort of there's lots of potential positives to a different way of working, lots of real downsides that are sort of starting potentially to come through. Has it all just happened a bit quickly?
I suppose my instinct was to say I'd like to see more research on the impact, because you can sort of think from a common sense point of view, and we have a lot of interns working at my institute, and there've been points when they've had to be remote and they've performed incredibly well, and we've worked really hard to integrate them in meetings. But when they've been able to come to us for 2 days a week and there've been people there, I think they've just enjoyed it a lot more. But I would like to see the research about, what's the optimal way of managing this? And the only research I could think of in this conversation about face-to-face is there are all these prisoner dilemma games about how do you get people to make decisions that are in everyone's best interest. And research there shows that if you have face-to-face interaction, you can build more trust. But I think we need to understand more about there are lots of organizations where you don't meet your colleagues very often because they're across the globe, and you still find ways to build trust. You still find ways to induct people. You just have to work a bit harder at it. You've got to build time in the meetings for those personal conversations to say, how are you and what are you up to at the weekend? And you need to, it takes foresight and planning. It's not going to happen by accident. And I would really like to see these initiatives evaluated, have an internship program and compare the fully remote, the hybrid, the fully in the office. My suspicion is that the hybrid might work quite well for these young people, and that you give them a task, not necessarily always young, but new to a profession. You talk it through and then you go away and do it. And you've got that quiet space to get on with it. And you can also fit in other things you might want to do around your life. But I'd like to see the evidence.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to come to Terry in just a second. Terry Kudras Charnal, I probably pronounced your name really poorly. I'm so sorry. But Emma, just briefly, are you aware of, either inside of Deloitte or with your clients, who is sort of tracking this at the moment, a sort of monitoring of people feeling that they're experiencing, let's say, proximity bias? Is it something that you can sort of keep tabs on?
Well, yeah, I mean, so look, from my own organisation, in the UK, we are doing a huge amount to make this a success, and it's the usual thing that hopefully most employers did, which is go and ask your people, ask them what they want, but don't just ask them once. Keep going back and asking them. Ask them how pulse. Ask them what their experience is like. Ask them, are they still are they getting as much exposure as they want to have? I mean, we talk, from a global perspective, we talk about moments that matter, and we talk about actually working out what those are with your team. And so, but it is really important to keep pulsing, keep listening. And then actually the other thing for me will be following the data. So it will be at the end of year when it's promotion times. Yeah. All of that stuff, you have got to drill down into that data and then actually challenge. And that's what we have always done. We've, from a review perspective, it's making sure that, that you are taking decisions on the right premise. So the only other thing I did have a thought about, and having seen some of the stuff in the chat, is I do wonder, I mean, I attended a meeting recently which didn't go so well. And I think I mentioned this when we were chatting before, and I was dialing in the majority of people were in the room, and these are very good leaders that, you know, that do normally, you know, very, very much include, and yet I felt excluded. And I felt excluded by, you know, a lot of the chatter. And I think it was Ian made a comment in the chat about coming up with really clear guidance about, you know, some rules for this. And I do wonder whether there's something about it's where you are in the majority. Because equally, you know, I think about my own team globally, and Liz, to your comment, most of my team aren't in the UK. Most of my team, actually, there's many people in my team I haven't met because I took over a team at the start of the pandemic, and yet we have a really high trust relationship. We've all got each other's backs. We all have an apprenticeship model. So I don't know, and I wonder whether part of it is because actually, if you were physically there, you would be in a minority. The majority, you know, and so it's, you know, Rosie's point around virtual first, or, you know, I do think whoever came up with that, I think that's a really clever idea, because I do wonder if that's part of the solution here. And sorry, I appreciate I've gone off at a tangent completely, but I think that's really interesting.
The thing about remote first that I think is interesting, I wonder if there's anybody on the call who, were they to be in the office, could walk into any meeting room and really seamlessly and reliably operate the technology to facilitate a conference call. I just wonder, I have personally not experienced that myself. I get there in the end, but it's always a battle. I'd love to know if somebody has a brilliant technology setup. Maybe if you designed an organization to be remote first, you might finally nail the conference room facilities. Let's hear from Terry, if we may. Hi, Terry, nice to see you.
Hi, nice to see you too.
A number of comments in the chat, Terry. Tell us what you do and how you come at this.
I've got a strange situation at the moment. I worked in education as a librarian up until November, so throughout the pandemic, and we were able to work remotely. I don't have children, but my point about children was because I flourished during the pandemic in terms of my work. Right. I was able to focus loads, kind of like what Marie-Claire said. When I'm away from other people, I find I'm most productive. But I did kind of wonder, you know, there was a lot of talk about, is it worse for women because of the increased workload of their own work plus childcare responsibilities? Yeah, and I'm wondering whether that's more of a kind of determiner of if it's better or worse than male, female, if it's sort of mothers and non-mothers. And I this conversation is really interesting because it's opening me up to kind of the work culture. Obviously, education is predominantly female. So luckily, I've not experienced a lot of the kind of bad male-dominated side of work culture that can come in the private sector. But
long may it remain so, Terry. I hope future adventures, this all remains a mystery to you. Rosie, it's a good point that Terry raises. What do we know data-wise of whether, we've talked about sort of a gendered split, but is there a sort of mothers and not mothers version of this experience?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, parenthood is a key factor, and Emma mentioned this earlier. It's the interaction between gender and parental status that really matters, because women still, you know, although statistics have changed over time, women still do an overwhelming share of that caring work. It doesn't mean that there aren't, you know, there can be workplace cultures that are not inclusive to women generally, but when we think about this kind of combining, you know, whether hybrid working works, it's often that interaction of parental status and gender. So there will be, of course, men too who find this difficult, and sometimes actually find it harder to raise that they're finding it difficult in some kinds of cultures. So you're absolutely spot on, Terry, to mention that.
Thanks ever so much. I wonder if we might bring in, I have my eye on Amelia Stewart, who shared some demos data in the chat, talking about who does and doesn't like working from home. Are you there, Amelia?
Hi there, sorry.
Hi.
Hi. So we did a report at Demos which found that low income workers, so earning below 20 grand, liked home working just as much as higher income workers, although they faced additional barriers like paying for heating, for example. But when I attended some focus groups with some of these women, they said that, again, they were struggling to pay childcare costs. So I think that really comes into it too.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you done much at Demos on this particular area? Is that, just to give us a bit of context, how are you looking at it as an organisation?
Yeah, so we're looking at how hybrid working, like as a model for the future, we think it's really here to stay. We think that the whole myth of like working from home and that people don't want to do it and we need to get people back into the office is really disproved by the fact that people really like it generally. They want that flexibility. But there are additional barriers and we need to look at, you know, how can low income workers heat their homes, especially with this fuel crisis?
Yeah, sure.
How can we make childcare more affordable? And it's interesting from a gender perspective because I think broadly men and women are just as likely to want to work from home. But when we were looking from a low income perspective, but we didn't really have enough data to disaggregate it in terms of lower income. Like we didn't have enough data really on motherhood, because I think that's really where it comes in. I think we couldn't see much of a difference between men and women, but we didn't have enough data on children and young children. I think young children is key here.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. Rosie, just picking up on what Amelia said then, what was it you in our briefing call that said to me a statistic about a study that had asked men and women to say whether they wanted to work from home or not?
I did, and I thought it was I thought it was the last slide at the beginning. Actually, I only heard it on Women's Hour, and it was a 10%. Yeah, it was a 10% gap difference between men and women wanting to go back to the office kind of 4 or 5 days a week. And I think one of your colleagues probably picked it up and put it on the last slide. And I mean, that makes sense. I think this is one thing that I think we should really think about when we say we want to work from home all the time. Is that always going to be in our best interest? It needs to be an employer that's going to support you and make sure they evaluate you properly, because sometimes you might, if that's not the case, you might be better off going in a couple of times a week and having that proximity effect.
I was really interested in this, Emma, when I dug into the LinkedIn, you know how they do on LinkedIn sort of debate of the week or something like that, and it popped up on my feed this morning, quoting a survey from Bloomberg, 4 in 10 leaders are the most worried about proximity bias in relation to return to work. And then there was a whole list underneath it of things that you can do as an employee to mitigate the risk of experiencing proximity bias, i.e. sort of if you are working remotely more than, I suppose, peers and people in your team, what you can do. And they include things like join meetings early, be active in Yammer and Slack channels, join ERGs, which I think are sort of employee working groups on various different fronts, be active on social, be a brand ambassador, write about being the embodiment of corporate values. I mean, it seems like a lot.
Yeah, no, I didn't see that. Hadn't actually had, it's been one of those mornings this morning. I haven't had time to have a look at that. But look, again, I mean, I think, I come down to how I try and lead, and I really hope that my team members do not think that they have to join a network or ERG. I mean, I think it's great if people want to join an ERG, but they should be joining it for the right reasons, not because they think it's going to get them noticed. I think, and you know, to show that you are a custodian of corporate values or, you know, whatever, all of that sort of stuff. I think, yes, if that's who you are and you want to do, but you shouldn't have to do that to feel included.
Yeah.
You should be led in a way that and I, you know, that actually does, you know, you are included. You should, you know, where somebody does care, someone, you know, wants to get to know who you are. And actually there was a really interesting comment in the chat about somebody put, and I can't remember who it was, apologies, but about well-being, because I think that's another dimension. That's a really big priority for us as an organization, a big global inclusion priority. And, you know, all sorts of challenges around actually as leaders, how do we, when we're not in that sort of proximity physically with someone, because that's normally the time when you can spot some, you know, that somebody might not be okay. And then hopefully you can ask that, are you okay question, you can help signpost them. when you don't have that interaction, you know, is there an issue that you may, as a leader, may not spot that? And so, you know, we've putting together all sorts of guidance and ways to do that. So look, I think the onus, I think a lot of leaders are feeling very overwhelmed at the moment. I think there's a huge amount on leaders' shoulders, but I think basic human you know, behaviors, to me, I really hope that people don't feel that they have to join multiple things and do multiple things to actually effectively be noticed and have equal opportunity.
I'm very pleased to hear it, because I felt exhausted just with the things I was supposed to be doing. I don't even know what Yammer is, so that's a concern for me. Samantha Fiander, are you there?
I am.
Hiya.
Hi.
Hello. You just made a comment about gendered and power dynamics and things. Just tell us what your reflections are.
It's actually Rosie then spoke just after that, and it's connected about what's actually in terms of mental health and well-being and people's interests and how to have that conversation. I think we've been able to have the conversation about understanding that some people might be at risk or in danger if they're at home during the pandemic, right? I think most employers have been able to say, oh, actually, we might need to provide a space for someone, but it's broader than that. And I think what I'm witnessing potentially is that some people, and sometimes it is still unfortunately gendered, but not always, are got atable by their friends, family and others, because they're in their house, or they're down the street, or they're across the way. Whereas in the past, they were an hour away by bus or on the tube or whatever. They were in our office. You wouldn't suddenly turn up at the office and go, oh, could you just do this for me? Or this has happened. Can you go and do that? That doesn't happen in an office. But what I'm witnessing in lots of different ways through personal and professional connections is that particularly caregivers, mothers, others, but it's not always women, but quite often, are got atable. There's an expectation. Oh, you're here, so I can just ask you or pull you out of that. And that might be helpful to some people, because actually they don't have the burden of doing that after 5 or doing that while they're on the bus. But for others, I'm not sure that's a healthy distinction between their work life and their rights to throw 100%, 80% that they can into their job in that time that's healthy for their own mental health. So that concerns me.
Samantha, in your world as a manager, are you, forgive me, I didn't want you to say what are you doing hybrid? Have you sort of fixed the pattern? Is there a sort of
So my place of work is all remote working at the moment, but it's interesting because I work in an applied research area. So I'm part of a wider university, and with fantastic leadership, actually, I really couldn't fault it in this pandemic. What's really interesting is that we're having quite a good conversation about the difference between agile working and flexible working and what those things mean. And so I think, sorry, I came late to the conversation at the very beginning, so I apologize to missing any of the presentations at the beginning. But I think what's really important is that you contract well with your teams, and that there is a shared understanding of, well, what does flexible working or agile working or hybrid mean in our context? Like, what am I signing up to, and what are the expectations? I think we can all learn from each other's, and I'm the same. I'm picking up all these articles and reading them with interest, but you cannot just transpose one from one workplace or one culture and think that that's going to work for you. You have to find what works in your context. And I wonder whether there is something more traditional about academic environments that might show some lessons where it was never called hybrid working, but in some situations it might be. So those people who work from home when they're doing a lot of research writing, for example, they wouldn't have been in an office. So are there some dynamics and some modelling that we can use pre-COVID?
Yeah, interesting. I'm going to go to John. I've just spied, has a little hand up, and then I'd like to hear from Jaya. Hiya, John.
Yeah, hi there, Liz.
And Oscar. Hi, Oscar.
Yeah,
nice to see Oscar too.
Make it a bit more human. I just want to go back to a point you were asking about earlier, saying, do you think that most people could come in and operate the technology? And I think I could, but then I'm a freelance trainer. And interestingly, I'm finding in some organizations that I'm working with, they're bringing me in to kind of help them get their meetings organized, to get structures set up, or sometimes to kind of be the facilitator whilst someone else will be the chair of the meeting.
Yeah.
So I think there are ways to do that. And I think there are particularly ways to augment women's voices in that, because otherwise it becomes, as we often term it, the hippo, the highest paid person's opinion. And unfortunately, that is still often a man. So if we can do things a little differently, a little more structured, and I spend quite a bit of time teaching people how to have these structures and systems in meetings so that they then afterwards can take those forward. And I think also there's the idea that people want to sort of translate traditional ways of working, back-to-back meetings, into virtual. And that's just impossible for people to spend 8 hours a day on a screen. It's just beyond belief. And yet we do it to ourselves.
John, just give us a couple of examples, those things that you were talking about, that if you're going to get your meeting hygiene really right, so that the hippo, I've not heard that little acronym before, it's quite a good one, doesn't dominate. What's a couple of things that make a difference?
So I do a lot of work in the Nancy Klein Time to Think paradigm.
Yeah.
So people have come across that. So for example, taking a thinking round, everybody has an expectation that they will speak and there will be a limited amount of time, or that you can go off into thinking pairs separately into breakout rooms so that you can sort of double or triple the amount of thinking time that people have available. And then when they come back, there's a round of freshest thinking. So in that situation, everybody gets a voice that's much more inclusive, be it on gender, be it on race, be it on seniority. There are ways where a good chair can make all that sort of stuff happen. Decent agenda management, posing agenda items as questions rather than just budget 2020, but in terms, what are the key deliverables on the budget 2020? So even really simple things like that. But I think definitely the expectation that everybody's voice will be heard. And I saw someone say about they're surprised a lot of people don't switch their cameras on. I think we're intruding. It's not that people are working from home, they're living in the office. And I think I'm fine. I've got a big screen behind me. What you can't tell is that I'm moving house next week and that's all packed boxes. Okay. It's all right for me, but for a lot of people, they're working in their, in their child's bedroom and things. So for me, I think we've got to do some way to democratize access to the technology and things as well. I think that's a key thing. If organizations were making sure that people had better technology delivered to their house. So those are some key things, I think.
Thanks ever so much, John. I could see Rosie nodding vigorously and waving her hand. Rosie, do you want to come back on some of the stuff that John was saying? Then we'll come to Jaya.
I just thought what John was saying was really powerful, and it linked into a previous point in the chat that I tried to scroll up, but there's so many comments I can't find it, about whether there is an intersectional dimension. And I was on a call with a woman recently who was talking about the way that promotions were dealt with at her work. And she was an Asian woman. I don't know her precise background, but what she was saying, that for her, she found it, due to her cultural upbringing, her particular specific experience, she felt that affected the way she put herself forward and how she presented herself. And her boss said, well, you just need to muscle in, rather than actually the boss saying, you're brilliant at this. Can I put you forward for this? He said, if you want to progress, you need to be the hustler. And I really liked what John was saying, in that we have colleagues with all different kinds of personality types, backgrounds, gender, all the rest of it. We shouldn't just be providing an environment that suits the hippo. It should be an environment that actually brings the best out of everybody. So I really like that idea of actually, how do we make sure everybody's voice is heard? And those quite simple initiatives are exactly the kind of things we should be doing. Who have I not heard from in this call today? What have they got to contribute? It's not rocket science, but it's something that's very easy to overlook if a hippo's taking all the space. I just love that analogy.
Thanks ever so much, Rosie, and thanks, John. Let's hear from Jaya. In fact, I think it might have been Jaya that raised the point about intersectional data on proximity bias. Hiya, nice to see you.
Hi, Liz. Hi, everybody. Really interesting conversation. And, firstly, I'd just like to make a point, perhaps maybe even boldly, that, everybody that's speaking, I think I'm the only Black ethnic minority woman that's actually contributed so far. So we must acknowledge, who's speaking and who's being spoken for. And that leads me to that intersectional analysis, which is incredibly important because, and I think it links in with some of what John's saying about his screen and what's going on in his life. There are people who work in hybrid settings and are living in intergenerational households. And perhaps there's also digital poverty involved. And these are not companies like Deloitte. These are maybe smaller companies that don't have the resources and capabilities to provide the right technology, etc. And then it being exposed, exposing your world into your professional world. And I think there's lots of dynamics there that perhaps isn't necessarily being captured, maybe in this conversation, but also in data. As well as the fact that, we've seen in COVID-19 that we were all basically to some degree trapped in our homes, but some vulnerable women and children, and perhaps even men, but from a gendered feminist perspective, they were trapped with their abusers. And so hybrid working or any kind of working like that doesn't suit all of us. And there needs to be a very a complex kind of an understanding to the differences and the diversities of experiences. And, my own personal experiences, I'm an academic, and, for about 8 years, I was living in Paris and traveling back and forth, and I did my job perfectly well. But my senior management team decided that, you can't work as well if you live in Paris, except that my white male colleague lived in Dorset, and I basically was able to get into London quicker than, sorry, not Dorset, Devon. And I was able to get into London quicker than he was, and in some instances, even a colleague from Brighton, with all the train troubles, I could do back and forth very easily. So in terms of proximity bias, it does exist. And I have been consistently told that deals are done in the corridors, and those that smoke, together, the deals are done there. And I've seen it happen in the last 6 months. There is nothing I can do about it. And, and I'm a parent. So, there's the gender aspect there, there's the mother aspect there, there's the ethnicity aspect there. And there's a hidden disability there as well, so there's lots of, and disability is something that I didn't mention in the intersectional analysis, which I think is incredibly important, because again, there are people who might have hidden disabilities as well as, or physical disabilities that, prohibit or allow for hybrid working to work for them or not. But very lastly, my last point is that from the moment I started doing my PhD to even now, everybody in my family knows that I work from home, so they drop in for a cup of tea, and that can be nice, but also can be annoying. So I'll leave it there, but thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh no, it's a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us. Jaya makes a ton of brilliant points. Maybe I'll ask you the question, Rosie. Big company, little company was one of the things that Jaya mentioned. So if you are Deloitte, or if you are, I don't know, Pfizer, I mean, I'm picking the companies at random, you have a sort of army of people available. You have, facilities and resources that if you need to get people more comfortable chairs, or set them up with a dongle, or whatever the thing is to make it work, you're more able to do that than if you are a small setup or a little charity, or maybe even an academic employer, or so on. It is really difficult to capture the sort of data picture of that, to get an understanding of how different types of sectors that maybe have different types of employees are being affected. Is there a policy thing in the midst here somewhere? Because I'm not sure, us as a newsroom, we can have a reasonable stab at tracking the FTSE 100, but outside of that, it's really tough.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that the stories that I really stuck with me over the pandemic was, I was speaking to someone from the Women's Budget Group about, the strengths and the pros and the cons of working from home. And she gave the example of a woman with 2 very small children, single parent, sent home from her call center with a laptop, and told that she had to continue to take calls at exactly the same rate as she did in the call center, except she had a toddler and baby at her feet. And just thinking how incredibly stressful and difficult that might have been. And the toddler and baby will be back in school now, or nursery now, but whether she's getting the kind of support to work from home in the way that someone in a much larger employer or higher up the hierarchy an employer would do, it seems very unlikely. And we know that's very true across the whole workforce. And there is in terms of job quality, we've got a project going on at the Institute at the moment run by my colleague Rose Cook. And there is a big gendered aspect to job quality. Some of the most insecure and unpleasant jobs, not all of them, but some of them are more likely to be conducted by women. And there is also an intersectional angle to that. And I think your point about data is this has happened very fast. There are so many questions that we want answers to, we need answers to, about what people's experiences are like in different sectors at different kind of income levels across the country in terms of working from home. And we don't have those answers. And I really think that's going to be incredibly important going forward.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to ask as a follow-up, Rosie, on data, the mandatory sex-based pay gap reporting is back. It was sort of paused for a bit and is back again. I have some frustration with it. It's a good step forward. It's not the whole picture. I have some frustration with it as a tool. We've had thinkings before about what other frames need to be added into that, ethnicity and so on, disability for sure. And there's a sort of next layer down from pay that I feel that this question of a potential three-tier workforce really speaks to, which is about promotions and perks. And you don't get that in pay gap reporting. Some companies, I believe, track it. There are some studies, the Women at Work survey has looked at, length of time to first promotion and so on. When can we get into, what will it take for us to get more texture to the data? Because at the moment, the sort of the evidence that is offered up by particularly large companies say, look at the women we've got on our board, and our pay gap has come down by 2%. And I know, because I know the women working there, that is not a non-sexist organisation. So what will it take to really get that coming through?
Well, I mean, I'm very glad you asked me that question, because we're about to do some work with Emma on just this very question, but we're just about to start that project.
I didn't know either.
But we at the Institute, we published a report last year looking at gender pay gap reporting, comparing 6 different legal regimes. And the UK system is great, and it's very transparent. You can see what a company's gender pay gap is. But if you compare it to some of the other regimes that operate in the world, for example, in Australia, there's a lot more data that's actually collected. There's a lot more information and narrative around what are your action plans? What are you doing for parents? What are you doing for, are you breaking it down by ethnicity? There's a lot more rich data for some of the other countries. And France and Spain actually have penalties. I mean, we're going to use them in very rare instances. But if you have a persistent problem and don't have an action plan that's realistic to deal with it, potential for significant financial penalties. So I think gender pay gap reporting is a really good start. It galvanizes attention, but you're really right. It also masks an awful lot that's going on underneath. And I think we need to understand a lot more about, we keep coming back to this, don't we? Cultures inside organizations. And one of the things that I've heard Emma speak about before that I think is really important is when you've got high exit, if you've got a toxic team, or if you've actually got sticky teams where, because it's a great place to work, you don't go for promotion or anywhere else because you just want to hang on to that lifestyle. So I do think we need to collect much richer data, and as you say, cut it by intersectionality. So watch this space. We shall have some work coming out later on this year with Deloitte and Emma.
And that's great, Emma. I can see you there, and we're just into our last sort of 4 minutes or so. And we've touched on a lot of things today, and we've brought elements into the conversation that I wasn't necessarily expecting. Just give us a flavour of what you will take away from today.
Oh gosh, it's been amazing, and again, my memory is so awful. But just looking at some of the comments, there was somebody, and it might have been Fiona. Yes, it is Fiona, who basically, I just love the comment. It's about, is hybrid working worse for women and others? Maybe it's just highlighting existing workplace issues. And that's one of the best comments. I loved Samantha's comments around the gotism, because I live that. And as a parent, my girls are 12 years old now, and they're quite self-sufficient, but they still come to me even though there's somebody else physically in the room. And it's that awful thing where you just feel like you're neglecting somebody, even though if I was physically in the office, they wouldn't be coming to me. It would be perfectly easy to sort out by, others that are there. I think the other thing for me that I just wanted to add was around transparency. I am a huge fan of transparency. We were early gender pay gap reporters. I totally am where Rosie is on this. I think it's a good start point, but I think there's a real opportunity for companies. We know that the narratives that are being published don't go into enough depth. We know actually a larger gender pay gap can often be, basically because there aren't enough senior women. And, and that's actually the issue with my own organisation. We need more women at the more senior positions. And then the question is, well, what are you going to do about it? Put the data in there. I would love to see, from a transparency perspective, something that starts to look at the way people work and, how many people are working in a hybrid way, and looking at that by all genders. I'd love to start to see that. And I think there's an opportunity for investors, and obviously for others, and then just some bottom up pushing as well. We're all at the moment, everybody's worried about retention of talent, and we all want to hang on to people. So I think the transparency point is really important. I would say the ESGs, everybody, particularly the larger organizations at the moment, this is a big thing. Everybody wants to be reporting the S bit. And I think there's much more we could do in that as well, that could show, as Rosie said, how can we show, we've got a hypothesis today, we've got some great points, but actually we don't yet have the data that shows that this is an issue.
You can't help feeling that the data will start to flow through, will start to become a requirement even certainly for public companies who are grappling with this. And I wonder if for us as a newsroom, an action we can take away is to start thinking about how we can incorporate some of the data we have related to hybrid working into our Responsibility 100 index. It feels like when the data becomes available, if it starts to filter through, it feels like that ought to be part of that piece of work. I will certainly take away from today my new acronym HIPPO, which I haven't heard before and I love. I've certainly experienced HIPPOs at work in my career. Some of those very practical things that John was mentioning as well, the decoupling of the tech running of the meeting and the chairing of the meeting, a little bit like we do on ThinkIn. If I had to press the buttons and make the call work, I certainly wouldn't be able to listen and learn at the same time. So meeting hygiene for me is very important. And that a phrase that I think was Samantha that's coined about get-atability, I think is really, really helpful for people who are at work, or like myself, my kids are with their father during the week, so I don't have that same sort of constant demand on my time. There's not going to be a little face peep round the corner that if you're at home and you have people, furry people, big people, old people, whatever, that you get distracted and bothered. And I think it's really helpful to remember that too. I've had a really great hour. I hope you've enjoyed it as well. Thank you so much to Rosie and to Emma and to everybody who has contributed on screen and in the chat. Jackie, I can see Terry, I can see Mary Claire, I can see everybody there. Thanks so much. Ella Hill's done a great job on the chat. Have a great rest of Friday and we'll see you all next week. Take care.